Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining this week's Tips and Tricks webinar. As you can see, today's topic is on our 2025 security report. Please use the Q&A chat in this session if you have any questions. We'll make sure we answer those during this webinar. Our presenter today is an R&D group manager, Sergey Shukovich. Sergey, what do you have for us today?
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for having me here. And in the next 25 minutes or so, I will talk about the main highlights from our State of Cybersecurity report, the latest report we launched recently. It highlights the main trends and development of the last year and what we see that already happening is going to happen in 2025. First of all, the report focuses on 5 main trends that I will go through today. One is cyber wars and how cyber wars of 2025 edition look like, how they operate and what is it. We will talk about ransomware because it's impossible to put aside everything happening in the ransomware ecosystem. I will also touch the infosteer that this trend is not completely new. It started after COVID with all the trend of remote work. And last year, it achieved its peak of infosilo targeting. I will also touch the edge device vulnerabilities and the cloud. But I would like to start with some statistics and from Checkpoint data. First of all, about most targeted sectors and industries. So education continues to be for the 5th consecutive year the most targeted sector in almost all the countries, including the United States. While last year we observed 75% increase in attacks against educational institutions compared to 2023, a relatively big increase. But other trend is maybe on sectors that are not on the top by number of weekly attacks, but they have the highest increase year over year in the attacks. And those are the sectors of sensitive technological supply chain, hardware and semiconductor, and software. Those two sectors had increase of 179% and 109% compared to previous year. Why? Because all types of attackers, whether those are niche detectors or cyber criminals, try to go large, try to target one, let's say, software company, and via this initial access to target all the customers of this company. And that's how more and more attackers operate now. So that's emphasizes the importance of supply chain. Another interesting statistic we observed, this data is from a Checkpoint IPS sensor, is about what vulnerabilities are attackers using. There are 2 parts to this. I will start with the bottom. You can see as 15% of the CVEs the attackers are using are from 2013 and earlier. So what does it mean? That still a lot of organizations don't patch. Because if attackers are using CVEs from, let's say, 2010 or 12, it means it still works. So that's the bottom part. But the top part is also very interesting because CVEs from 2024 that were released last year are allegedly only 4%. But if we look on it differently, that 1 of every 25 exploitations last year used a vulnerability that was disclosed in the same year. Moreover, in many cases that we did research on, for example, a group called Magnet Goblin, that CPR published a deep analysis of it last year, we see that attackers are using vulnerabilities within 1 day after a CVE is publicly disclosed or a POC appears in dark web or in the wild. So the time to patch now that organizations should try to patch becomes much, much shorter. The 30 days that most of the organizations try to patch within their systems, in many cases now are not enough because the attackers are much, much faster. And that's something that is important to emphasize. Now let's talk about attack vector. So first of all, email continues being the most dominant attack vector with 68% of the attacks starting via email. It's this trend started in 2019 and it's still continuing, like email the top. But last year we also observed an increase in web-initiated attacks. mostly by one malware family, one loader called Sogolish or fake updates. What are those? Basically, cyber criminals hack different websites. Mostly those are WordPress websites that are not patched or updated on time, and then implement some JavaScript. And when the user surfs to those websites, he gets a pop-up urging him to update his Chrome browser or his Java or something like this. When he clicks this pop-up, his machine is infected. And this malware, fake updates, became one of the most dominant threats last year, and led to significant increase in web-initiated attack as a whole worldwide, as we see in Checkpoint in our data. Getting back to the email, if we go to 2023 or 2022, the dominant file types were executables and different types of Office files. For example, Excel files with macros. Since Microsoft blocked macros by default from internet-originated files, we see a big change in types of malicious files. What we see now is that the most common malicious file types via email are HTML and PDF files. Well, also we see more and more attackers using archive files that are password protected with the password in the body of the email, and inside the archive file, mostly those are LNK or JS files. And we see it as a big tendency. What does it mean? That first of all, the email protection solution or emulation solution should have at least some capabilities on opening those files. It's important. And secondly, that employee awareness programs now became much more complicated, because in the past you could have told your employees, oh, don't click executables files and don't activate macros in Excel files. Now it's much more difficult, because you just can't tell your employees not to open PDF files, because every enterprise using PDF for a lot of legitimate stuff. And it's a very kind of consistent trend we see about the growth in PDF and HTML. Also, looking on Checkpoint incident response statistics, that by the way, most of their customers are not specifically Checkpoint product customers, we see a bit a concerning trend, because even when those organizations do have proper security solutions, in many cases they identify and call incident the attack and call incident response on the very late stages of the attack. So in many cases, in 18% and 18%, it happens only on credential access step or on communication with C2 server step. While in 12% of the cases, the intrusion was discovered only on the impact stage. What does it mean, impact stage? Basically, mostly the enterprise discovered that they are compromised and under attack only when the ransomware was run and encrypted the files. So that's a bit about what we see. So it means that even if you have a good product, but you don't have a good SOC team that monitors what is going on in those programs, the alerts and everything, you still can be in a problem. But now let's deep dive into the key trends. The key trends that I mentioned previously, and let's talk in more detail. So first of all is cyber war, and how cyber wars 2024-2025 look like. If we go a bit backward to, let's say, 2021, beginning of 2022, before Russia-Ukrainian war, I think most of you, and I am also the same, would have thought that, the next big war, cyber will be the doomsday weapon. That in the beginning of the war, countries will be devastated and boomed by some big cyber attack. But as we see, neither in Russia-Ukraine war or in the war that continues in the Middle East, it didn't happen. Instead of this, we see like different attackers as part of cyber wars. Most of their focus is to undermine public trust, exploit social fractures, and destabilize the institution and government. What we see is that nation states mostly conduct what I call chronic attacks rather than an acute one, set of a lot of small, medium attacks. And what are types of those attacks they do? One is disinformation and influence campaigns. I will talk in my next slide about it. We see more and more of a state-affiliated activism, while in the past, activism was mostly kind of anonymous, some op that are going on pro or against some thing. Now, most of the activists became another arm of governments, deniable arm of governments to attack other governments and other countries. We see more and more disruptive malware, different wipers, that their goal is to not to conduct espionage or steal sensitive data, but disrupt machines or networks. And we observe what is possible to say like red buttons. What was reported last year widely, like China-affiliated groups had different types of access to utilities, electricity, water institution in the United States, in additional countries, but without doing anything with it. But just having access to those critical infrastructure networks and waiting for a decision to activate this access. So those are red buttons. But now let's talk about disinformation and influence campaign. Last year in CPR, we did two interesting researches in those areas. One is about AI. We surveyed about 40 different elections worldwide and tried to see in how many of them AI was actively used. And our threshold wasn't just, let's say, Twitter or X account that doing deepfake and has 5 followers, but our threshold was when AI, we consider AI is used in the election, when this use of AI made it to the median. So it's not only like someone used it, but it did some impact. And we saw that at least in third of the elections, there was significant use of AI. In some cases, it was by candidates to improve their own image. In some cases, it was by candidates against other candidates. And in some cases, it was by allegedly or likely nation-state actor to intervene in election. Of the latest, we saw 2 possible cases for this, one in Slovakia and another in Taiwan. Another interesting research we did about disinformation, it was in elections in Moldova in Europe that happened in last October. Basically, those elections in Moldova were also a national referendum whether Moldova will join EU or not. And what we observe is a very unique disinformation campaign, because mostly disinformation is going in social media, in public media, in X, in Facebook, Instagram, TikTok in some case, even in Telegram. But we saw here the campaign fully went on email. That different government executives in Moldova and education executives were targeted by very specific messages, impersonating EU institutions and telling what will happen to Moldova if they join EU. We saw those daily campaigns, and I will give you an example. What does it mean? What will happen to Moldova if they join EU? For example, if Moldova joins EU, all the garbage and from Romania and Ukraine will be transferred to Moldova. Or if Moldova joins EU, there will be 15 official days for LGBT community. And there were a lot of messages on, I would say, non-consensus subjects in Moldova. Subjects that from the beginning are not on full consensus, and those behind, we know they are Russian speakers. We are not able to connect to the specific thread group. We just know they are Russian speaking. We're able to divide people in Moldovan governments and to oppose joining EU. Another trend that it's impossible to skip is about ransomware. So in the beginning of 2024, there were 2 significant takedowns of the biggest groups, Logbit and AlphaV. And as we see, this takedown was in the beginning successful because in Q1, there were less than 1,000 victims that were published on Shamesite. Maybe here is the right point to mention what are Shamesite and where from this day. So almost all the ransomware groups nowadays, before they encrypt the networks of their victims, they exfiltrate sensitive data and threaten to publish it if the ransom demands will not be addressed. So they have double extortion in this case. And we monitor all those shame blogs in the dark web to see whom they publish and whom they extort. So in Q1, there were really a relatively small number of victims published. But as we see, as you can see on the left chart, while the number of Logbit victims went down after the takeover, a new group emerged, a group called Ransom Hub, that went up and up. And we generally saw up to Q4 a quick recovery that accounted of almost double of the victims that were extorted compared to Q1. Yes, I can tell that Logbit takedown was successful from one perspective, that now the ecosystem of ransomware is much, much more fragmented. There are much more smaller groups because Logbit was really a clear leader in this. Talking about general number of victims. So generally, we observe more than 5,000 victims posted on data leak websites, on those shame sites on the dark web. While our assessment that the real number of victims is between 5 to 7 times more, because those who pay are not published there. What is even more interesting is 50% of the victims' companies are US-based. So US is by far the most targeted country by ransomware. About the sector. So for second consecutive year, the industrial manufacturing continues being the most targeted sector by ransomware. Why? First of all, because it's just very complicated to protect the combination of IT and OT network. And secondly, because those are private sector. And by some recent researchers, that every day of disruption in industrial manufacturing costs in average between $30,000 to $40,000 to the manufacturer. So every hour, sorry. So several days of disruption already costs millions. So that's why ransomware gangs assume that likely industrial manufacturing companies will pay to them. Well, also something important to mention that there also was a jump forward of healthcare. Well, in the past, there were moral limits. There were limitations to target healthcare organization. Now there are no more moral limits, and ransomware gangs massively target healthcare institutions, especially in the US. We can tell that 65% of healthcare-related extorted victims are based in the US last year. Now let's talk about the next trend, infostealers. So what are the infostealers? Infostealers are basically a basic malware family that their main goal is to extract everything saved in your browser. What's saved in your browser, those are credentials, those are payment card data, and cookies and tokens. And that's very important. Also, many infostealers are able to steal cold wallets, take screenshots, and exfiltrate files. And last year, we saw, first of all, a very concerning trend about the increase in infostealer activity. 58% of infostealer activity compared to 2023. But what is more concerning and what important is that their focus is not targeted directly corporation, but to target bring your own device. Most of the infostealers operate in the strategy of spray and pray. They just try to infect as much as possible machines, not only focusing on corporate networks, and then mining the data in order to get credentials to corporate resources. The best one is to get credentials for VPN, of course, but also 365, Okta, DFS, Slack, Jira, or any corporate resource. And as I mentioned previously, due to the fact that they can, in many cases, are able to steal also the cookies or the tokens, so it can allow them also to bypass multi-factor authentication if the cookie is still valid. An interesting point to mention here is that about 70% of the infected devices by infostealers were not corporate, but personal devices, bring your own device, or what we can call contractor devices. And even more interesting to mention that what are the top URLs we identify on infected device. You can see here the list of top URLs on the infected devices by name. You can see that most of the URLs completely make sense of top internet services like Google, Facebook, Instagram, Netflix, this, Amazon, and more. But we see here number 3 is Roblox. We see also on the top Twitch and Epic Games. What does it mean? That bring your own device that is used for gaming has much, much higher risk for infection. When the same device is used to connect to corporate resources and for gaming, the risk of it to be infected by infostealers is extremely high. And why? Because mostly those who involved in gaming download a lot of stuff from torrent, for example. They download different cheats, cracks, and such stuff. And I would say a high percentage of all those are bundled with malware, or when you download in torrent something you think it can be a game, a cracked game or something, in the end of the day it will finish an infostealer installer. So that's an important lesson we learned from the data. Next trend that I want to touch is about edge devices and operational labor. So first, what are edge devices? Those are firewalls, different types of IoT devices like cameras, printers, and small home and office routers. We see more and more different actors, especially nation-state actors affiliated with China, targeting those devices, both as part of their infrastructure and as initial access vector to corporations. We observed also 1CB in checkpoint gateways last year that also was were targeted as part of this trend. But with this, we saw much more CVs in our competitors' firewall. But it's important to understand that it's a very wide trend that those nation detectors, I would say, don't care whose firewall is it. They see that their targets have specific firewall, they try to target it. And they target all the companies that produce firewall. The last but not least, to touch the cloud trend. So first of all, what we see is that one of the biggest takeaways that what leads to a lot of events is misconfiguration of cloud environments that's basically caused by the complexity. By the complexity of cloud, it's not easy to configure it properly, and it makes IT person life difficult and the attacker's life very easy. Also, we started seeing for the first time that there is more and more what we call bidirectional lateral movement from on-prem to cloud and vice versa. When the attacker gets initial access to one of those, he's able to move to another one or vice versa. And it's something new because in the past, most of the exceptions were, oh, the attacker has access to cloud environment. So, okay, our on-prem is the safe and vice versa. And it's not so anymore. Also, we see that you have on cloud, you have full security dependency on your identity provider. If your identity provider is compromised, so you're as secure as your identity provider. So if he's compromised, you're in a big problem. And we saw it with different events that happened during the last 2 years with Okta, for example. And the last very interesting trend we started seeing last year is there are more and more attackers that focus on hijacking cloud-hosted LLM models. That the attackers target corporate cloud environment when their goal is to hijack the LLM models there for their own malicious use. And we see it more and more. It's another reason why different types of attacker attack cloud environment, just to utilize the LLM models that are hosted there. So I would now like to finish with some small outlook to 2025 year we already started, and what we think will happen. First of all, in the realm of AI, we observe and think that there will be more and more cases of AI misuse and data breaches via AI, mostly in areas of data leakage, when employees will upload sensitive corporate data, source code, PII, customer information, and different proprietary information to LLM models that are public, whether it's OpenAI or DeepSeek, Qwen, and others, and that's kind of a potential channel for data leak. We also started seeing and think there will be more and more AI-powered financial crime, whether different phishing, bypassing of know your customer, of business email compromise, and more. We predict that there will be more and more attempts at least, and some of them will be successful, to execute supply chain attacks via open source projects. We saw some cases of those from nation-state actors like North Korea and cyber criminals, and we expect it to continue. As I mentioned previously with ransomware, we see more and more decentralization of cybercrime ecosystem, while law enforcement do more and more big takedowns, successful takedowns of top ransomware, top botnets, top infosteer. So those who are behind those will not disappear, but the big brands of this ecosystem disappear, and there are just much more small infostealers, smaller botnets, smaller ransomware. And the last that we observe that cyber wars will continue with a lot of chronic attacks that their main goal is to destabilize different governments and institutions. Thank you. And you have here a QR code if you want to read the full security report. You can download it here and read the whole report that my presentation is based on.
No, thank you. Great information. Yes, you can take that QR code. I will also include that link in our follow-up email. I'll also, you mentioned CPR, Sergey, Checkpoint Research. So, I mean, that's a good good resource for people to go to during the year to keep up on what trends they're seeing during this year, correct?
Correct. Yes, yes. We have also our dedicated blog, more technical one. It's research.checkpoint.com, where we publish deep research we do about nation state actor, ransomware, and different trends of how attackers try to bypass different controls.
Great. Yeah, we'll include a link to that also. Obviously, all these trends he's talking about, Checkpoint has solutions around these, so I encourage you to talk to your account team. If you don't know who to talk to, reach out to me. I'll get you the information you need or get you to somebody knowledgeable. But I think with that, we'll let you go. So Sergey, thank you so much. Great information. Like I said, I will send out the follow-up email with these referenced links, and we'll see you here in 2 weeks for our next session. Thank you for joining us. Thanks again, Sergey.
Thank you.
Bye all.